intelligence flows related to illicit finance specifically, organised immigration crime, and scam centres, using National Crime Agency capabilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, on global security, the audit underlined the extent of Beijing's support for the Kremlin. The government has already tripled the number of Chinese entities sanctioned for equipping Russia's illegal war, and we will continue to confront that. The audit reiterated that our approach to China must stay rooted both in international law and deterrence. We will continue to confront China's dangerous and destabilizing activity in the South China Sea, which I saw for myself when I visited the Philippines. And we will continue to work with our regional partners to support freedom of navigation and call out China's abuses. We will double down on AUKUS. We will not challenge our long-standing position on Taiwan while sustaining unofficial but vibrant ties with Taiwan on trade, on education, and innovation. We will also never shy away from shining a spotlight on human rights, notably the situations in Xinjiang and Tibet. While on Hong Kong, we will insist that China honours its commitments under the Sino-British Joint Declaration, including by repealing the national security law and releasing Jimmy Lai. Madam Deputy Speaker, the audit made clear that our approach will always be guided by the UK's long-term economic growth priorities. It provided ample evidence of the extent to which our economies are intertwined. China is our third biggest trading partner. Our universities, second largest source of international students. China will continue to play a vital role in supporting the UK's secure growth. But over the past decade, we have not had the structures either to take the opportunities or protect us from the risks which those deep leaks demand. Businesses told us time and again that they have lacked senior political engagement, lacked adequate government guidance, and we have already begun to develop new structures, regular economic and financial dialogues with my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, setting us on course to unlock $1 billion of economic value for the UK economy, and positioning the UK's world-leading financial sector to reflect China's importance to the global economy. Joint economic and trade commissions and joint commission meetings on science. We will also launch a new online hub bringing together detailed and specific business advice. And forthcoming trade strategy will set out how we will support British firms to enhance links with China's vast and growing consumer market, as well as assess new tools to keep goods made by forced labour anywhere in the world off Britain's high street. Madam Deputy Speaker, the audit recognised that China's global role does not fit into simple stereotypes. China is the world's biggest emitter, but also the biggest producer of renewables. It offers $80 billion towards development annually, and China is the UK's second largest research collaborator. 11% of British research output included Chinese authors. So the audit was clear. The UK must develop new dialogues with China on issues like climate, development, global health and science, as well as on trade. And in doing so, we're driving our long-term interests in creating secure opportunities for UK PLC. Madam Deputy Speaker, we cannot deal with China's complexity unless we improve our capability to understand it for our national security and for secure trade and growth. The audit showed that under the last government, there was a profound lack of confidence in how to deal with China, and a profound lack of knowledge regarding China's culture, its history, and most importantly, its language. Madam Deputy Speaker, over the past year, I have found that far few Mandarins speak Mandarin. We are already taking action to address this, introducing a new China fast stream in the FCDO, creating an FCDO global China network, training over 1,000 civil servants on China policy in the past year. Enhancing these capabilities still further will be a core focus for the £209 million of FCDO Transformation Fund, announced in the National Security Strategy by my honourable friend a short time ago. The new strategy, which proceeds from this audit, will ensure that the government examines the full spectrum of interests in its decision-making processes and delivers the consistent approach which was so sorely lacking. Madam Deputy Speaker, anyone expecting a simple prescription on China is not living in the real world. The audit has painted a complex picture, but it has provided us with a clear way forward. The UK's approach to China will be founded on progressive realism, taking the world as it is, not as we would wish it to be. Like our closest allies, we will cooperate where we can, and we will challenge where we must. Never compromising on our national security, recognizing the complexity of the world as it is, engaging confidently, carefully and pragmatically, delivering secure growth, these are the hallmarks of grown-up government, acting in the long-term national interest. I commend this statement to the House.
Foreign Secretary David
Speaker, I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of a statement, and I look forward to reading the audit and also receiving the detailed briefings that clearly are not able to be put in the public domain. Let's be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. China thinks its way is the best way and the only way. Its leaders are on a quest, an international quest for global governance and for their frightening authoritarian model to supersede ours. Ours is one of democracy, openness, and standing up for freedom and values. Madam Deputy Speaker, China has been ramping up its military with alarming conviction, including conventional, nuclear, and space capabilities. It is a critical enabler of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And we saw President Xi standing side by side with Putin in Moscow just weeks ago. So be in no doubt, China and Russia are collaborating across all domains to underestimate our very democratic freedoms and the West. Beijing tramples on the Sino-British Declaration in Hong Kong, threatens BNOs on British soil, and has imprisoned Jimmy Lai, a British national, through this awful politically motivated trial. Beijing's unjustified aggression in the South China Sea is dangerous, and it unacceptably intimidates and challenges the sovereignty of its neighbours in the Indo-Pacific. It is consistently and constantly threatening the peace-seeking democracy of Taiwan while committing the most appalling human rights abuses in Xinjiang. And it applies hybrid and grey zone techniques against Britain, including malign cyber activity directed at our democratic institutions and sanctioning our own very members of parliament, all while exploiting vulnerable countries through its Belt and Road Initiative. China also flagrantly brushes aside economic rules, steals intellectual property, and has developed sophisticated models to acquire strategic assets around the world. Despite all of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, it has taken the government a year to produce this audit, which seemingly fails to set out any kind of serious strategic framework. And I think it's fair to say we know why. Because the government, and in fact the Foreign Secretary has touched on this, has gone cap in hand to China to bail out its terrible handling of the British economy. It is setting up its closer ties, economic ties with China, while knowing very well that British businesses here are struggling, not just when it comes to competing against China, but actually struggling to absorb the weight of labour's own regulatory costs in this country. Yeah. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary, and so far we've not seen it in this statement, whether or not he can name a single area where measurable, tangible progress has been made in advancing critical British interests with China, whether it's on national security, economic practices, on climate, or on human rights. He did fail to mention the fact that members of this House have been sanctioned by China. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we have seen signs of naivety from the government consistently, if I may say so. Within a day of the Prime Minister, meeting with President Xi, within one day of the Prime Minister meeting President Xi, he effectively held this as an opportunity to bring about a strong and consistent relationship, whereas surprises would be avoided. And within the next few days, 45 pro-democracy campaigners were jailed in Hong Kong, following a very harsh application of the draconian national security law. That's completely unacceptable. What is the Foreign Secretary's actual strategy to deter China from systematically extinguishing freedoms from Hong Kong? And will he commit to using the full weight of the government machine to do more to protect BNOs and Hong Kongers suffering what is an outrageous transnational repression in the UK, rather than, if I may say so, just issuing guidance and training? The government has constantly and suspiciously backed the application for this new China super embassy in London. Why is the Foreign Secretary and the government not showing the same backbone that the Irish counterparts and Australian counterparts have shown when they saw fit to block embassy planning applications from Russia that they deemed too risky for national security? Does the government have a practical strategy to deter Chinese efforts to capture Taiwan by military means or by stealth, or opposing the human rights abuses in Xinjiang? What is the Foreign Secretary's end goal, and what are the means of getting there? What will the Foreign Secretary do to find new critical mineral supply chains to reduce reliance on Chinese trade? And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, what will the government do now to move Jimmy Lai's case onto an urgent footing, away from this complex consular case handling that it seems to have in the Foreign Office? Madam Deputy Speaker, the government also needs to urgently sort out some of the grave contradictions that have been mentioned in this statement. If I just may highlight a few. We've already seen in the Foreign Secretary's statement today, he speaks about the China audit underlining the extent of Beijing's support of the Kremlin. We don't question that and doubt that, but some action is needed. The statement also says that they're reiterating the approach that China must stay rooted both in international law and deterrence. How is that helping Jimmy Lai at this particular moment? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do just want to say that we will always support the security of and the defence of our country. So the government must do much more when it comes up to keeping Britain safe from China.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to say, I know that the Right Honourable Lady can be pretty brazen, but a lecture from her about China policy should make even her blush. Her party oversaw more than a decade of division, inconsistency and complacency towards China. There was no strategy, there was no plan, and there was no sense of a national interest. The Intelligence and Security Committee, chaired by the Right Honourable Member for New Forest East, from her own party, said that the actions on China had left Britain severely handicapped in managing our future security. And the truth was that she was at the centre of it. Where was she during the ill-judged Cameron Osborne golden age? She was the Minister for the Treasury. Where was she during the humiliating Huawei U-turn? She was Home Secretary at that point. Under the Tories, they had their head in the sand. Under them, Britain's defences were weakened and our armed services hollowed out. It's a Labour government that's investing 600 million in our intelligence services to deal with those threats. It's a Labour government that's investing 290 million extra a year in our diplomatic capabilities in this area. It's a Labour government delivering the biggest increase in defence spending since the Cold War. And it's a Labour government making Britain secure at home and strong abroad. And can I just refer the Honourable Lady to page 28 of the Strategic Defence Review, which she clearly hadn't bothered to read, that makes clear that, of course, we understand that China is a sophisticated and persistent threat. She talks about the embassy. She should know, as Home Secretary, that it is a quasi-judicial decision that's been properly made by the Secretary at the Department for Communities and Local Government. She talks about Jimmy Lai. I met with Sebastian Lai last week. We've been raising this issue on every single occasion. A trial is ongoing. Let us see how it will complete. She raises transnational aggression. We're the ones updating our state threats legislation because they left the gaps and did nothing while they were in power. She raises the situation in Russia and the Chinese supplying Russia with Jews. Who has done the sanctions? 5 rounds of sanctions under me as Foreign Secretary. What did they do? So really, I'm not going to take any lectures about this subject from this government who know they were found wanting on the question of threats from the Chinese.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our relationship with China is most definitely a difficult one. On the one hand, it's our third biggest trading partner, but on the other hand, the National Security Strategy on page 35 says that there's an increase in espionage, they're undermining our economic security, and they're interfering in our democracy, and that has increased over recent years. So, and the Foreign Office needs to hold the ring. So the China audit it needs to be a wide-ranging and is a really important piece of work. We were looking forward to seeing it published and looking forward to the Foreign Secretary publishing it and coming to talk to us, and he did say that he would. But instead of that, we are looking through a glass darkly, and we don't know, we won't be able to see it. So we want to be able to do our job properly. We want to be able to scrutinise this really important piece of work. So can I suggest that instead that the Foreign Secretary makes available a reading room for Foreign Affairs Committee members and staff at the FCDO before his 8th of July appearance so that we can study it properly and hold them to account?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for the issue that she's taken in the China audit. And I did say that I would update the committee, and I'm looking forward to appearing before the committee and taking questions on this subject. Can I say to her that in completing this audit, it has been important to remain consistent with our Five Eyes partners, and she will recognise why much of the audit has led to a high level of classification. And she will note when she looks across the G7 and other Five Eyes partners, she will recognise that actually many of them have handled their approach to China in the way that I have set out in doing what I have said. But I would refer her to the Strategic Defence Review and its contents on China. I would refer her to the National Security Strategy that has just been published and its references to China. And I would also refer her to the UK's industrial strategy and its references to China alongside the statement that I've just made.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also thank the Foreign Secretary for the advanced sight of his statement. For years, UK governments have failed to take seriously the challenge posed by China. The Conservatives failed to deliver even the semblance of a coherent approach to dealing with Beijing. And today, after months of waiting for this audit, the government's failure to publish a standalone document is immensely disappointing. So can the Foreign Secretary set out how members of this House, including those on the Intelligence and Security Committee and the front benches with responsibility for foreign affairs, defence and security, can be briefed on the more sensitive elements of this audit? On these benches, Madam Deputy Speaker, we recognise China for what it is, a threat to our values and interests. The Foreign Secretary is right that our approach must confront the facts as they are. These facts include China's hostility to the UK's allies and support for our adversaries, its abuse of human rights in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, the theft of intellectual property, and its efforts at transnational repression. And so instead of trying to establish warm relations with President Xi, the government should commit to clear red lines on what it will not accept. For example, we have yet to receive a satisfactory explanation for why the Honourable Member for Bath was denied entry to Hong Kong while on a private visit to see her family. So will the Foreign Secretary confirm what steps he will take if Beijing refuses to give an assurance that MPs will not be blocked from visiting Hong Kong or China? We now hear reports that the Deputy Prime Minister is preparing to wave through Beijing's application for a proposed mega embassy in the heart of London. This is not a technical planning matter to be cloaked in the veil of quasi-judicial powers. It is a matter of national security. Opposition has been expressed by the United States and by pro-democracy Chinese and Hong Kong activists living in the UK who already face CCP-sponsored bounties. Has the Foreign Secretary met with these activists? And will the Foreign Secretary now formally request that the mega embassy application be blocked?
Well, I'm grateful for the Honourable Gentleman's statement. And as I have said, this was a comprehensive audit of our relations with China, and precisely because of some of the reasons that he and honourable members have raised consistently, there are important classified sections of that audit that must properly remain classified. But he does raise the Intelligence Committee, and he will recognise that the mechanisms are in place for that committee to understand some of the detail as he would expect and scrutinise as he would expect in the usual way. He mentions the experience of the Honourable Lady for Bath, and can I make clear that when I met with the Chinese international minister and the member of the Communist Party just recently, Mr. Li Jingqiao, I did raise with him that case and our huge concerns and its implications for the free travel of British citizens and democratically elected members of parliament, not just in this country, but across the world. He raises the embassy and questions of security. That was precisely why I and the Home Secretary, advised by our security agencies, wrote on the issue of the embassy, raising concerns that would need to be addressed if it was to move forward. And yes, of course, I've met with activists campaigning, particularly on the issue of transnational repression, and so has the Minister who deals with this issue and the Indo-Pacific.
Matt Dougall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As chair of both the APPG on Uyghurs and on Hong Kongers, I've lost count of the number of responses from ministers I've had which referred to today's audit. So forgive me if I take today as the start of a conversation rather than the last word on many of these matters. He used again today his 3 C's mantra of competing with China, cooperating with them, and challenge them where needed. I wonder if he understands that many of the Hong Kongers, the Uyghurs and others who are fighting for freedom from or within the PRC sometimes worry that the order of that is deliberate and that the challenge part is a lower priority. I wonder what reassurance he can give to those groups that commercial interests won't trump the responsibility to protect the freedoms and security, particularly of British Hong Kongers. And given the threats identified in the audit, but also in the national security challenge, can he confirm that those will be fed into the decision-making on whether to allow the embassy?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend and for his championing on the APG and pressing these issues. And can I say, I said in my statement that we will cooperate where we can, but we will challenge where we must. And of course, I have consistently raised the situation in meetings with counterparts for the Uyghur Muslims, I've encouraged them to implement the recommendations of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in relation to Xinjiang. Genocide, of course, is a matter for the international courts, but it is something that I, and of course across our allies in the G7, take very, very seriously indeed. And we will press this issue with the government of China on every single occasion.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I first of all, before we go to the political knockabout, it doesn't matter who's in government, I've been in opposition on this issue, okay? So let's settle that one before we get. Can I just say to him, I give him a quick audit now of exactly what should have been. China threatens Taiwan, it's invaded the South China Seas, it's having massive disputes with the Philippines, it's genocide, slave labor, organ harvesting, transnational repression, tax Hong Kong's dissidents here, Hong Kong dissidents under threat constantly, cyber attacks on the UK, supports Myanmar in their repression, the military regime supports Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it also supports North Korea and Iran, and has trashed the Sino-British Treaty on Hong Kong, it has arrested Jimmy Lai, it has sanctions on UK MPs, and it thieves all the IPs on private companies. What a record to balance what against some potential trade. I asked the right honourable gentleman, which has already in a way been asked, but it's worth repeating. In the course of this embassy decision, that it was said quite clearly in the media that China would not apply again after the refusal of Tower Hamlets unless they received assurances from the UK government. Can he now tell me that they have not received any assurances, or have they received private assurances from the government that they will get what they want and get this embassy?
Well, let me just express respect for the right honourable gentleman's expertise in relation to the China threat, and also that he is subject to sanctions that I have consistently raised with China, noting that recently it lifted sanctions against members of the European Parliament, and I pressed them recently to do the same. And let me assure him, there are no grubby deals on any issues, and certainly not in relation to the embassy. And I reject any suggestion of anything other. He describes the context for China. I refer him to page 28, which summarizes better than he did, in fact, the challenge. It's a sophisticated and persistent challenge. China is increasingly leveraging its economic, technological, military capabilities, seeking to establish dominance in the Indo-Pacific, erode US influence, and put pressure on the rules-based international order. We agree.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his statement. I'll be the first to recognise with him the need for pragmatism on this issue. My right honourable friend speaks of our closest allies, and I heard in Washington a couple of weeks ago just about their concerns over the super embassy, of course, here in London, where they have real concerns, as I say, but also the fact that they are banning electric vehicles for their autonomous and connected nature, which is an extraordinary thing to consider, but that is what they are doing. So whilst I recognise there is an economic need, obviously there is political pressure as well. Can I just ask that for the members of the committee that I chair in National Security Strategy, that we should also have access to those confidential documents so we can be clear-eyed about what we face?
Well, again, I'm grateful for the work that my honourable friend does in this area, but I must maintain that it has not been the case under any government that for other than those on the Intelligence Committee who are able to have access to high classification documents, and those who are privy councillors who are able to have access to conversations with the government and officials that they pledge to keep secret. The government cannot abandon those principles that have led us well for many years under consistent governments.
Edward Morello.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On page 35 of the National Security Strategy, it says instances of China's espionage, interference in our democracy and undermining of our economic security have increased in recent years. Just 3 pages later, it claims the importance of creating the basis for a reciprocal and balanced economic relationship with China. I wonder if the Foreign Secretary recognises the inherent conflict between this government's desire for closer economic relations and the Chinese government's desire to undermine our economy.
Well, the paradox is important, but let me be clear that £600 million worth of new investment in our intelligence services is an important development. Investment in our capabilities, including new powers and capabilities for the National Cyber Centre, is an important development. But of course, as our third biggest trading partner, being able to unlock £1 billion worth of trade must also be central to our undertaking at this time.
Gurinder Singh Yasam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this statement, particularly as it becomes clearer and clearer in terms of how the Conservatives are so badly mismanaged, not just the policy towards China, but also a relationship with China over successive years. Whilst there are economic opportunities with China, there are also threats, and we're hearing about some of those. But we also just heard in the National Security Strategy statement earlier about the importance of partnerships and alliances, including with key allies in the Indo-Pacific. But does the Foreign Secretary agree that Boris Johnson's 2019 embracing of China's Belt and Road Initiative was a serious diversion from many of our democratic allies, many of whom saw the Belt and Road Initiative as a threat?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Prime Minister Johnson's record on China is shocking. It led to the grave embarrassment of having to do a U-turn on Huawei, who at that stage would have been able to get into the most delicate of our own telecommunications infrastructure. It's because of that we undertook to do a full audit in opposition. That audit, of course, is constantly ongoing, but I hope he will see it reflected in the industrial strategy, in the national security strategy, and of course in the SDR that was published recently.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I say I enjoyed the buzzword bingo with which the Right Honourable Member presented his statement. And may I just remind him that the rebellion on Huawei was actually led by this side of the House, not by his. May I also just question one of the meetings he referred to with, may I say, a little more pride than I would have done, as he referred to meeting Liu Jinchao, who is personally responsible for Operation Fox Hunt and Skynet, which is, of course, the transnational repression, the kidnapping of Chinese citizens and the repatriating them by force to mainland China. He didn't seem to be quite as ashamed of that as I would have been. May I also ask him why he has still not made clear that the first scheme that we left intact, left ready to go, will not yet be introduced for the whole of the Chinese state. It should be, that's what it was designed for, and for all the words that we've heard, there is not a single practical outcome. It's all still waffle.
I've got to say to the honourable gentleman, and I recognise that there, and it's right to put that on record, there are members in their seats on the opposition benches, and he is amongst them, who raised significant issues over the past decade or so about the approach to China. But with all seriousness, that was why in opposition we said that we would do a full audit. He will recognise that and welcome, I suspect, the extra investment in the intelligence services, particularly in our national cyber capability. And I see, as I say that he's nodding his head. Those are tangible outcomes. You cannot, on any analysis, describe that as waffle.
Rosie Writing.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before coming into Parliament, I worked in a buying department for a large international retailer. And in my career, I saw a move to sourcing from China and a rise in popularity in retailers based in China. So can the Secretary of State outline how the audit will work with the Department of Business and Trade to level the playing field between UK manufacturers and imports from China, particularly in light of unfair trading practices, to protect our economic security in UK supply chains?
Well, can I refer her, it's a very good question, I say, to my honourable friend, to the industrial strategy, to the further work that we say we've got to now do on supply chains. One of the areas that we've taken a big interest in from day one in government, of course, is global supply chains in critical minerals. And we're working with now many partners across the world with the Global Clean Power Alliance to provide those new supply chains to deal with the very issues that she has raised.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first of all say thank you to the Foreign Secretary for his efforts that he's made in raising the issue of being refused entry into Hong Kong. And I'm looking forward to reassurances that no UK MP will be refused entry into any Chinese territories. Madam Deputy Speaker, his statement mentions that China is our university's second largest source of international students, and that includes my University of Bath. And while, of course, global academic exchange and the free flow of ideas is at the heart of our liberal values and should be welcomed, shouldn't the government be aware of the fine balance that must be kept, not allowing young researchers and students access to certain knowledge and information that could ultimately be used against the UK?
She's absolutely right. It is a fine balance. We do need to invest more in our police capability, and that is an outcome of this audit. And we do need to continue to work with our universities so they understand the threats in this area as well as the opportunities.
Before I call the next speaker, members will be aware that we have 3 debates this afternoon, so I am aiming to finish this statement around 2:35. Louise Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just say to the Foreign Secretary how much I welcome this China audit, and in particular there's one aspect that I'd like to highlight. As someone who studied Chinese at university and lived there for a year, I know how complex and different China can be, and it has also been a source of frustration to me since then about how there can be many misconceptions and ignorance around China. And I think whatever anybody thinks of our relationship with China, what is absolutely vital is that we have very clear communication and that we deal with China from a position of knowledge. So can I just say, will the Foreign Secretary agree with me how important it is that we have the upskilling of the FCDO to make sure that we have that knowledge of Chinese culture and language skills so that we are fully prepared for the years ahead?
Yeah.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for her question. It goes to the heart of capabilities. We've got to have diplomats, more diplomats, with a fine understanding of China, more Mandarin speakers, and we're doing that. The last government, sadly, were cutting the amount of diplomats with that capability and that understanding, and investing in the Great British China Centre, so that that understanding of the culture is across our country. She's absolutely right.
And can I just remind members that it may be very helpful if we have short questions and short answers. David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the one hand, the Defence Secretary has told the world that the UK will increase offensive cyber operations against China. And on the other hand, the Deputy Prime Minister is pushing for a Chinese super embassy in London, which will be furnished with secret data cabling. Does the Foreign Secretary see any inconsistencies with his government's approach to China?
What I see is naivety on the behalf of the honourable gentleman. Let's be clear, the Deputy Prime Minister has not made her quasi-judicial decision, and it's wrong, and the honourable member should correct the record of the House because it's not made. That's the first thing. The second thing is, why would you want a situation in which the United States can take the hardest of approach on China under both governments, but trade is up, in which our G7 partners can understand the risks and the threats of China, but all of their trade is up? Under the last government, we were in a situation where trade was down only for the UK. That cannot be right.
Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I refer members to my register of interest. So I thank the Secretary of State for his pragmatic approach. I think opposition is easy, but I think members opposite know that if they were in his shoes, they would be doing exactly the same thing. Huawei has been mentioned a couple of times in passing. The reality is that the guddle over that rollout, it delayed rollout of 5G by 3 years and cost the economy £7 million, which is just incredible. Shameful, actually, shameful. In terms of my questions, so there is, I welcome the stress that placed on improving cultural links between the UK and China. And of course, our universities are a key part of that. So can he commit to making sure our universities have say in how we establish better relationships between China and the UK?
I can reassure him that our universities were able to contribute to our China audit.
Law.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and as the Chair for the All-Party Group of Tibet, I welcome the fact they've responded to human rights, both the situation in Xinjiang, Tibet. I would like to have seen about religious freedoms, which includes next week's birthday of the Dalai Lama, probably the most well-known Tibetan in the world, and his future reincarnation should be for the people of Tibet, both inside and the diaspora. Given the Tibetan diaspora and the Uyghur diaspora and Hong Kong nationals are under constant surveillance here by the Chinese Communist Party, how does the government plan to take the G7 definition of transnational repression recently agreed and translate it into domestic law?
Right. Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I remind the honourable gentleman that in December we appointed David Smith, MP, the Special Envoy for freedom of religion and belief, and he's right to raise the issues that we're aware of in Tibet. And can I also say to him that on the issue of transnational repression, we've got a broad range of powers, obviously, to counter foreign interference in transnational repression, particularly under the National Security Act, which we're updating.
Speak to Swallow.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Foreign Secretary both for the statement and for that answer. He will know that in Bracknell and the wider Berkshire area, we have a large Hong Kong community who have been terrified at the threat of national repression from the Hong Kong government. What message can he share to my constituents about the protections available in this country for them to enjoy the democracy and freedom of speech that we so value here in the UK?
Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and the Minister for the Indo-Pacific has met with some of his constituents on this issue, and I hope he will welcome, because of the right concerns that he raises, the training for our police right across the nation on these issues.
Gregory Stafford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the government publish a list of sectors considered overly dependent on Chinese inputs, starting with critical minerals and clean energy components, to promote transparency? And will the Minister outline any clear government targets for reducing these dependencies?
Well, can I refer him to the powers in the counter foreign interference transnational repression under the National Security Act?
Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary mentioned Hong Kong in a statement, and I just wondered if he would consider speaking to colleagues in the Home Office about rethinking the changes to indefinite leave to remain, to making sure BNO passport holders don't end up facing questions going forward about their status to remain.
Foreign Secretary.
The issue he raises is still subject to consultation and will be announced by the Home Secretary in the usual way.
Harriet Crofts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK government is still considering Xinjiang as a credible supplier for turbines for the Greenbolt offshore wind project, and the SNP Scottish Government have given Xinjiang priority status for a factory to build turbines based in Scotland under their strategic investment plan. Both of these say to me that neither government is taking seriously the threat that China poses to our energy supplies. China is at best unreliable and at worst hostile and should be nowhere near our critical national infrastructure. So will the Secretary of State finally rule out, or at least give us a date of when we can hear a decision on if Xinjiang will be a permitted supplier for energy infrastructure in the future?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that through the National Security and Investment Act, we've got a robust robust framework to make individual decisions like the one she refers to on Xinjiang. And as she knows, energy is one of 17 priority sectors under the NSIA in which government can block any potential acquisitions on security grounds, and that remains under consideration.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's 4 years today since the Apple Daily ceased publication, and Jimmy Lai still languishes in a Hong Kong Stanley prison. It's worth noting his name and encouraging the Home Secretary to, the Foreign Secretary, to raise his case as often as he can. It's welcome to see in the statement that we are strengthening our response to transnational repression. Can the Minister confirm that that includes restoring access to the Mandatory Provident Fund, which is another way that the Hong Kong government is spreading its chilling impact on BNO visa holders here in the UK?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising this. So can I also just name check the work of the Member for Cities in Westminster on this issue? The issue is under consideration, and we have been, of course, discussing with communities these very important pension issues.
Sir Julian Lewis.
So in his statement, the Foreign Secretary says that our approach will always be guided by the UK's long-term economic growth priorities. And as an example of this, he refers to our university's second largest source of international students being China. And yet the Intelligence and Security Committee's report on China, of which he approves, did state in its press notice, China is similarly aggressive in its interference activities. China oversteps the boundary. It's been particularly effective at using its money and influence to penetrate or buy academia in order to ensure its international narrative is advanced and criticism suppressed. Now, in answer to the Honourable Lady for Bath, he did say, well, we look to the universities to take precautions. Where the financial incentive to universities is concerned, I'd rather look to someone else to take the precautions.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman is right. We do have to be vigilant. As I said, sitting behind this audit is a lot of work at high classification, and he will know that the Intelligence Committee understands the very nature of that work and understands the nature of the work, particularly that sits behind the Strategic Defence Review and the National Security Strategy. And of course, that is ongoing. And I'm happy to ensure that he is aware of the work that we are doing with the universities at this time.
Christine Jardine.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary has already referred to the energy protections with energy companies, but with the situation with Xinjiang and Cable Orient in the Highlands and in the North Sea, the concern is not their ability to produce, it's their ability to switch off and on the network and our energy security and, as a result, national security. So can he tell us what mitigating factors are going to be put in place if those contracts are won?
Foreign Secretary.
I recognise the sensitivity and the import of what the Honourable Lady has said, and that is central to the considerations and the discussions that are underway within government as we look at these issues and balance them against our national security.
Jim Allister.
For weeks, Madam Deputy Speaker, some questions on China have been deflected on the basis wait for the audit. So it's rather disappointing that the insight we get today is indeed very opaque. In the Foreign Secretary's statement, he reveals that China is the UK's second largest research collaborator. Has the Foreign Secretary done an audit of the nature of that research? Are there economic and intelligent risks from that research? And is the government minded to take any steps to either monitor or to control the extent of that research?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman says that he would have liked to have heard more and that it's opaque. But the other side of that coin is that it might be reassuring that the government is not making available to the outside world and to China all of our intelligent capability and understanding. He will recognize that the biggest academic partner in that research is the United States. It is not surprising, as we see the economy of China grow in the way that it has, certainly over my 2 decades in Parliament, that it has emerged as our second largest. But I'd want to reassure him that, of course, the agencies are able to offer full advice to universities and examine sensitivities. And we are very, very aware of the threats that he has conveyed to the House this afternoon.
And with an example of a quick question, Sir Desmond Sway.
It was proper and lawful to send HMS Spey through the Taiwan Strait in pursuit of vital international freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, wasn't it? And can we see more like it?
Yes, yes.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I want to remind the Foreign Secretary that the government that invited Huawei into our telecommunications network was actually the last Labour government between 2003 and 2006. Long memories. He's tried to be partisan about it. The ebb and flow of these issues and the mistakes go back quite a long time, and he should acknowledge that. What assessment has he made of China's dominance of the world market for cellular internet modules, which are subsidised and sold internationally below the cost of manufacture? What assessment in particular has he made of the insertion of kill switches in Chinese-made wind turbines and PV cells? And will he rule out any Chinese involvement in our energy infrastructure?
I'm really going to take no lectures from the honourable gentleman, whose advice to former Prime Minister May led to the possibility of nuclear information being revealed. He should be embarrassed, and I'm surprised he came to this debate this afternoon.
Neil Sheffield.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that China is one of the defining geopolitical challenges of our age, I'm somewhat sceptical to read reports this morning that this much-touted, year-long awaited audit was in fact being significantly downgraded. Under this government, there has been a significant increase in ministerial engagement and visits with China, a policy that is at best incoherent and at worst incompetent. Given that actions speak louder than words, can the Foreign Secretary confirm that the Prime Minister will no longer be making his proposed trip to China?
Foreign Secretary.
I've got to say to the honourable gentleman, this is a lot of work, and we haven't even been in government a year. We pledged to undertake an audit. We've undertaken that audit. What I set out was comprehensive, and there can be no no-go areas for the UK Prime Minister.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The audit received responses from devolved governments. Last month, the Northern Ireland Finance Minister met with the Chinese Consul General in Belfast. The meeting was described as a formal diplomatic engagement of exchanging views on deepening cooperation. Significantly, Madam Deputy Speaker, no publicly released minutes or press interviews or who the full attendees were, no specific sectors or agreements referenced. Does the Foreign Secretary know what was discussed or agreed? Because as foreign policy isn't devolved, does he think he should, and will he ask? Or did the devolved government in Northern Ireland's executive, as a response to the audit, actually include what was discussed or previous meetings between the Chinese government and the First and Deputy First Minister?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the honourable gentleman has put his views on the record, and I will consult my officials about what he has revealed.
The final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary very much? I believe it is essential that we have a fuller understanding of the reach of China as well as their goals. And British citizens have contacted me regarding the human rights violation, not only against those in China, but those who live on our shores. So how will the Foreign Secretary undertake to ensure that China understands that their reach stops at our shores and that our people are entitled to think and to have freedom of speech, whatever they desire? and without any fear of reprisal. Thanks so much.
Secretary.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right. Our democratic norms we will always fight for and we will always press. We cannot accept repression, oppression, and actually criminal acts committed in our own country. We will stand up to them, and I have made those representative to my Chinese interlocutors to make that completely clear.
And that concludes the statement. Point of order, Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to seek your advice about the exchange I just had with the Foreign Secretary. Firstly, I pointed out that after the Foreign Secretary had been incredibly partisan about the history of Huawei's involvement in our telecommunications infrastructure, that involvement actually began under the last Labour government when he was a minister in that government and he tried to accuse members of the Conservative front bench of something similar. I also asked a serious question about the Chinese dominance of the world market for cellular internet modules, which is a very serious issue. We've all grown used to the fact that we don't get answers in this House, so perhaps you can give us advice about whether ministers are ever actually going to answer a question. But then he decided to abuse me and insult me personally about advice he claims I gave to the Prime Minister in a former role I had. He has no idea what advice I gave in that job. And if he cares so much about my personal history, he would actually read all the things I've ever written about the role of Chinese companies in our energy infrastructure. So I'd like him to take the opportunity to withdraw that accusation.
Yeah. I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order. What he refers to was a matter of debate and nothing disorderly occurred. This is not a matter of the chair, but I would urge that good temper and moderation in this chamber be followed at all times.
Point of order.
Point of order, Ian Duncan-Smith.
Well, I'll give way to the
Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a matter of record that former Prime Minister May was considering matters that pertain to our nuclear capability. The honourable member was an advisor at that stage, and she had to withdraw her recommendations on the China General Nuclear Company. That is a matter of record, and anyone in this chamber can Google it.
Point of order, Ian Duncan-Smith.
This is a separate point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker. While the Foreign Secretary is sitting here, I thought it would be relevant. We've just heard that America, the government, American government, has put in a second disapproval on the granting of an embassy to China in the location that it is. They've actually said they are opposed to it now for security reasons.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order. However, as he knows, it is not a matter for the chair. He has put his comment on the record. We now move to the 10-minute rule motion, and I'll give a few moments for the House to settle so that the member in charge has adequate opportunity to be heard. Thank you, dear. Ten-minute rule motion, Blake Stevenson.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about the consideration of flooding risks in the planning process, to make internal drainage boards statutory consultees for certain planning decisions and for connected purposes. During this Parliament, we've heard a lot about problems in the planning system. In particular, the government has spoken a lot about what it sees as the blockers, people who, for reasons this government seem not to understand, oppose developments they see as bad for their communities. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill intends to help go some way to fix the government's problem. Because the reality is, the reason many people in our communities become blockers is they have no faith that the planning system will deliver houses that make their lives better. These are hard-working people, Madam Deputy Speaker, and rather than listen to their concerns, the government has sought to bash them at every turn. One of the biggest problems in the planning system is the total failure of so many local authorities, and I refer members to my register of interest as a councillor, to properly understand and consider flood risk in new developments. That means that policy the government thinks ought to be sufficient to prevent, for example, development on floodplains in all but exceptional circumstances is being circumvented by developers. And without suitable expertise in planning, these developments are often going ahead without suitable drainage infrastructure to protect our communities from flooding. What does all of this mean, Madam Deputy Speaker? It means that for so many communities in mid-Bedfordshire and right across the country who've done the right thing, who've taken houses that the government wants them to take, those communities now find themselves with a higher flood risk, while developers have gotten away high and dry with their profits. And when they stand ankle deep in water in their once dry living rooms and desperately attempt to stop the next bad development making their situation worse, the Prime Minister calls them blockers. We're letting them down. And this isn't some hypothetical. It is happening in our communities in mid-Bedfordshire right now. Take the village of Malden. Malden has historically developed as a linear settlement running along the Greensand Ridge. But developers saw an opportunity to develop up the slope of the ridge. And that upslope development has caused a huge increase in flooding in Malden, to the point that homes that have stood for centuries with minimal flooding have now been reclassified by the Environment Agency as being within floodplain. Are the developers stopping there? Of course not. Another 40 hectares of land has been put forward for development around Malden as part of the call for sites for the next Central Bedfordshire local plan. Who gains from planning like this? It certainly isn't the hard-working people who already live in Malden, who saved up to buy the house that they'd been dreaming of, and who wish to be able to peacefully enjoy it without having to worry about getting sandbags out every time grey clouds form overhead. It isn't the people who worked hard to get their new build home in Malden, only to discover the planning system let them down and allowed developers to get away without building the right protections for their homes from flooding. It isn't the government who are left puzzled as to why all these people are opposing their plans to build thousands of more homes in our communities. The only people who gain are the big box developers who've thrown up the houses with minimal restrictions and mitigations and taken their profits, whilst our communities pay the price. And Malden is just one example. There are so many places in mid-Bedfordshire and across the country where our planning system has failed the people who need it most, the people we serve. That's what this bill will try to fix, Madam Deputy Speaker, starting by ensuring that where we have an internal drainage board, experts on flooding with flood management, that we take advantage of their expertise and make them a statutory consultee on development, which is likely to have an impact on flood risk in the broad area they cover. Many internal drainage boards are already contributing to this work by making representations on planning applications, but putting them on a statutory footing would ensure that their advice gets given the consideration it deserves, and it would cost us nothing. This bill will make a simple amendment to Schedule 4 of the Town and Country Planning Development Management Procedure England Order 2015 to insert internal drainage boards as a statutory consultee in the planning system. It will also ensure that we take the politics out of protecting people from flooding by ensuring that the Secretary of State may only remove internal drainage boards as a statutory consultee if they replace them with an alternative body who should provide advice on flooding risk. The Environment Agency already acts as a statutory consultee on planning matters which impact on floodplains, but they lack the resources to effectively and efficiently identify flooding risk more broadly. That is why internal drainage boards, where they exist, should be brought into the planning process to complement their role and ensure that proper consideration is being given to the flooding implications of developments for current and future residents. This bill would also ensure that planning authorities give appropriate weight to flood risk in the planning system, and that developers cannot get out of their obligations to build livable homes and not just their own profits. It would introduce a simple presumption against development where the lead local flood authority, the Environment Agency and/or the Internal Drainage Board consider that, when taking into account sustainable drainage infrastructure and flood mitigation measures, the development would increase flood risk for existing properties. It would require the Secretary of State to publish statutory guidance prepared by a panel of experts for planning authorities and lead local authorities on the minimum expected standards for drainage and maintenance in new developments. And it would build on recent government announcements on build-out rates and give planning authorities the ability to reject future planning applications from developers on the basis of past failures to deliver or maintain sustainable drainage infrastructure. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must do better for the hard-working people in our communities who want to return from work to a warm, dry home. It is the least they deserve. I present this bill for them.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
David Simmons, Sir Roger Gale, Nick Timothy, Mr. Gagan Mahindra, Dr. Ben Spencer, Sarah Ball, Alison Griffiths, Jack Rankin, Rebecca Paul, Lewis Cocking, Paul Holmes, and myself.
Blake Stevenson.
Planning Flooding Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 11th of July.
Friday, the 11th of July.